My name's Nora, I'm 29, and last month I walked into my art studio only to find my sister measuring the walls, because my parents had already decided it was going to be her kids' playroom. They didn't even ask me. That moment shattered everything I thought I knew about family. But they had no idea I was already planning something they'd never expect. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about family drama and emotional courage. I remember the sound before I remember the sight. That sharp metallic snap of a tape measure recoiling, followed by my sister's voice, floating out of a place that wasn't hers. When I opened the door, the sight stopped me cold. There she was, Megan, standing in the middle of my art studio with her hands stretched wide, measuring the walls like she was auditioning for one of those home makeover shows. My mother stood next to her, nodding with approval, and my father leaned in the doorway across from me, arms folded, looking every bit like the decision had already been made. I froze. The smell of paint, turpentine, and canvas dust hung in the air. It was the scent of my late nights, my exhaustion, my joy, my therapy. But in that moment, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Okay, so if the crib goes here, Megan said, pointing to the corner where my easel stood, then we'll still have room for the toy bins. And maybe a small reading nook. She sounded so confident, so certain, like this had been her room all along. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. What are you doing? 3 heads turned toward me, none of them surprised enough. Like they had expected me to show up eventually, but too late to matter. Oh, Nora, my mom said, her tone almost casual. We were just thinking, since you're not using this room as much anymore, maybe it's time to let the kids have it. You can always move your paints downstairs. My paints. My canvases. My life. Reduced to something portable, disposable. I stepped inside slowly, eyes darting across the space like I needed to memorize it. My brushes lined neatly in jars. My unfinished painting leaning against the wall, still wet from the night before. The faint outlines of an old mural I had painted years ago, partly covered but never erased. This wasn't just a room. This was me. Downstairs. I repeated, my voice trembling. Megan didn't even look at me. She was scribbling on a notepad, her hair falling into her face as she planned. The basement's bigger, right? And quieter. You'd probably even like it better. This light's way too harsh for painting anyway, but it's perfect for the kids. Her words landed like knives. This light. The light I woke up early for, adjusted my canvases around, used to bring life to my colors. It was suddenly more useful shining on toy blocks and baby dolls. I turned to my dad, desperate for some kind of balance. You can't be serious. He finally unfolded his arms, his tone calm, rehearsed. Nora, your sister has 2 children. They need space to grow, to play. You're one person. You can make do anywhere. One person. The way he said it, like it disqualified me from deserving anything at all. I wish I could tell you I fought back in that moment. That I shouted, slammed my fist on the table, told them this was my place and they couldn't just take it. But I didn't. My tongue felt heavy, tied to the roof of my mouth. Every word I wanted to say stayed lodged in my chest. And in that silence, Megan carried on like nothing was wrong. She pressed the tape measure against the window frame, squinting at the numbers. If we put the play kitchen here, the kids can still have natural light. I wanted to scream. Instead, I clung to the details. The sunlight catching on a jar of brushes. The faint smell of varnish. The rough wood under my palm as I braced myself against the table. I didn't just see a room. They saw storage space, but I saw years of my life. The nights I stayed awake painting through tears when I couldn't face anyone. The mornings I sold a piece online and felt, for the first time, that maybe my art mattered. The days I sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching in silence because it was the only place I felt safe. And now, all of that was just inconvenient. Sweetheart, Mom said gently, putting a hand on my shoulder. You'll understand when you have kids one day. Family is about sharing. About compromise. Her touch burned. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so blind. She didn't see that every compromise had always come from me. When I was 12, Megan got the bigger bedroom because she needed space for sleepovers. I squeezed into the smaller room, my drawings taped to walls I couldn't paint. When we turned 16, Megan got the car because she had more friends to drive. I biked to school in the rain. Even now, at 29, the pattern hadn't changed. Megan's needs were loud. Mine were quiet. And quiet never won. I tried to steady my breathing, but my hands trembled. This isn't just a room. It's my studio. It's all I have. Megan finally looked at me, her brows raised. Don't be dramatic, Nora. You can paint anywhere. But kids need a safe space. The condescension in her voice cut deeper than any insult. Don't be dramatic. As if years of pouring my soul into canvases was nothing more than playtime. My dad checked his watch, as though the conversation was already dragging on. Think about it. It's not a big deal. We'll start moving things this weekend. Not a big deal. Something inside me shifted. Not into rage. Not yet. Something heavier. Colder. A realization that no matter what I said, they had already decided. I stood taller, forcing my voice steady. I need some air. No one stopped me. Megan went back to her measurements. My mom sighed like I was being unreasonable. My dad muttered something about me being too sensitive. I walked out, each step echoing louder than their voices, the door shutting behind me with a final click. The cold evening air hit my face. For the first time that day, I let the tears come. I pressed my palms against my eyes, shoulders shaking. Because I knew it wasn't just about the studio. It was about every year of being overlooked, every time I was told to be smaller so Megan could be bigger, every sacrifice I made that no one remembered. And standing on that porch, tears streaking my face, one truth landed hard in my chest. My family was never going to choose me. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to keep the part of me that mattered, I would have to choose myself. The evening air wrapped around me like a thin, cold blanket, sharp against my damp cheeks. I stood on the porch, staring at the patchy lawn where the grass never grew quite right, and let my hands drop to my sides. My palms were sticky with dried tears. I wiped them against my jeans and drew in a shaky breath, but it didn't steady me. Nothing could, not after what had just happened inside. The truth that had clawed its way into me upstairs was settling now. Heavy and undeniable. My family would never choose me. They hadn't before and they wouldn't now. I thought about it, standing there in the dark. How obvious it seemed. Once I let myself look back. It started early, earlier than I wanted to admit. When I was 8, Megan got the bigger bedroom. She was 10 at the time and apparently needed more space. I didn't argue much then, because Mom promised I could decorate my smaller room however I wanted. I spent weeks taping drawings to the walls, cutting shapes out of construction paper, and arranging little shelves I begged my dad to build. But when Megan wanted new curtains a year later, she got them right away. My request for a real easel was brushed off. You can use the kitchen table, Nora. Why do you need something fancy? It wasn't fancy. It was what I loved. At 14, I wanted to join the art club after school, but Megan had soccer practice. She needed rides every day, uniforms washed, snacks packed. The art club was too late in the evening, Mom said, too inconvenient. So, I sketched in the margins of my notebooks instead, while Megan's trophies piled up in the living room. By the time I was 16, the story had already been written. Megan was the star. The one with friends, the one teachers praised, the one neighbors stopped to congratulate. And me? I was the quiet one. My art was a hobby. My successes weren't framed or displayed. They were tucked away, forgotten, left to gather dust in drawers. A car drove past the house now, its headlights cutting across the street, dragging me out of my memories. I pressed my arms around myself, shivering. I thought about the car Megan got when she turned 16. Dad tossed her the keys to a used Honda, proud and smiling. I stood there, clapping half-heartedly, while my stomach knotted with the knowledge that I'd be taking the bus, no matter how many shifts I worked at the diner. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter. That art didn't need a car. That I could walk. That I was independent. I believed it, too, until nights came when I sat in my room, listening to Megan pull out of the driveway, feeling like the world was happening everywhere else but with me. The porch light flickered, buzzing faintly. I stared at the chipped paint on the railing, picking at a splinter with my thumb. The memories kept unraveling, thread by thread. College. That was another story. Megan went off to a big university 2 states away, paraded like the firstborn who carried the family name into something brighter. Mom packed boxes for weeks, fussing over every detail. Dad loaded the car with care. I stayed home, sketchbook in hand, pretending I didn't notice the silence when no one asked about my community college orientation. When I finally left for my own classes, there were no photos on the porch, no big send-off. Just me, slipping into my beat-up sneakers and catching the bus downtown. And yet, when Megan brought home her first baby, the house filled with balloons and banners. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles. My mom cried tears of joy. My dad filmed every second. I was there too, standing off to the side, invisible again. A sharp gust of wind pulled me back to the present, and I wrapped my arms tighter around myself. The porch boards creaked as I shifted, staring at the window where the faint outlines of shadows moved inside the studio. They were still in there, planning, rearranging, planning me out of existence. I thought about the word forgotten. That's what it felt like most days. Not hated. Not mistreated in some dramatic way. Just forgotten. Passed over. Like I was background noise in my own family's life. When I was 21, I sold my first painting. It was a portrait of a woman standing alone on a bridge, her back turned to the viewer, staring into a horizon that didn't promise anything but space. I remember the rush of that sale. The idea that someone, a stranger, saw value in what I had created. I came home, glowing, desperate to tell someone. $50. Megan had said, holding her baby on her hip. That's nice. But how long did it take you to paint it? Doesn't seem worth it. Mom changed the subject to baby formula. Dad asked me to help bring in groceries. And just like that, my moment vanished. I leaned against the porch post now, tears stinging my eyes again. They had a way of doing that, snatching the meaning out of my life before it could even take root. And I had let them. But tonight was different. Tonight it wasn't just about a bedroom or a club I didn't join. It wasn't about a car or a send-off I never got. Tonight it was about the one space I had carved for myself, the one thing I had held on to all these years, being dismissed like clutter. The porch creaked again, but this time it wasn't me. The door opened behind me, and Megan stepped out, phone in hand, thumbs busy tapping. "Nora," she said, glancing up for a second. "Don't take it so personally. It's just a room." Her words were casual, offhand. She probably didn't even think twice. But they dug deep. Just a room. My voice came out rough. "This is my studio, Megan. My art. My life." She sighed, slipping her phone into her pocket. "You always overreact. The kids need space. You don't even have kids. You don't get it." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "No, I don't have kids. But I have something that matters to me. Why does that always come second to whatever you want?" For the first time, she looked caught off guard. Her lips parted, but no words came. She brushed past me instead, muttering, "You're being impossible," before heading back inside. The door closed, leaving me alone again. I tilted my head back, staring at the night sky. The stars were faint, dulled by the streetlights, but they were there. Tiny, scattered, persistent. I wondered if that was me, dim in my own family's glow, but still here, still burning quietly. But the weight pressed down harder. Every memory, every dismissal, every forgotten moment piled on my chest until I could barely breathe. It wasn't just about the studio anymore. It was about a lifetime of being small so Megan could be big, of being quiet so others could be heard, of being forgotten so someone else could shine. And for the first time, standing there in the dark, I wondered what it would feel like to stop carrying that weight. The night pressed against me, heavy and restless, as if the air itself carried the echo of Megan's words. Just a room. I stayed on the porch long after she went inside, my fists unclenching slowly, palms sore from the half-moons carved by my nails. A cool wind brushed my face, and I closed my eyes, letting it sting, letting it remind me I was still here, still standing, still breathing, even under the crushing weight of being forgotten. But a thought began to stir, fragile at first, then stronger, beating in my chest like a drum. If this studio was truly slipping away from me, then I wouldn't let it vanish quietly. I wouldn't let my art, my years, my soul, be reduced to clutter cleared out for someone else's convenience. If they wanted the space, they would have it. But not empty. Not clean. Not stripped of me. They would inherit a reminder. A final piece of me that they could never erase. I pushed the door open slowly, slipping back inside. The house was dim, the only light spilling from under the studio door. Their muffled voices floated out, low and practical, already dividing what would go where. My stomach twisted, but I didn't linger. I went straight to my bedroom, closing the door behind me before they could notice. Leaning against it, I stared into the dark. My eyes drifted toward the corner where my old easel leaned against the wall, half forgotten under a draped sheet. I pulled the cloth away, dust rising into the air like ghosts. My fingers traced the wooden frame, rough from years of use, splattered with flecks of paint like scars that never washed out. This was it. My last stand. My last creation. I dragged the easel into the center of my room, the legs squeaking faintly against the floorboards. Then I pulled out a canvas, larger than I usually dared. A blank expanse, tall and demanding, waiting for me to give it a reason to exist. My hands trembled as I set it in place, but it wasn't fear this time. It was anticipation, sharp and electrifying, like standing on the edge of something irreversible. I opened my paint box. The familiar smells hit me instantly: acrylics, oil, the faint tang of turpentine. My heart steadied just a little. This was where I knew myself best. Not in arguments, not in explanations no one listened to. But here. Brush in hand. Color in motion. The first stroke was black. Heavy, deliberate, carving into the canvas like a wound. My wrist moved with purpose, broad sweeps across the surface, building a horizon of darkness. From there, I layered blue so deep it swallowed the light, streaked with purples that bled like bruises. As I worked, memories wove into the strokes. Every dismissal, every overlooked moment, every time I had been background in my own story, it all pulsed through the bristles. My arm ached, but I didn't stop. The woman appeared slowly. At first, just an outline, slender shoulders, a bowed head. Then detail by detail. Hair pulled into a loose knot, strands falling messily as if she didn't care who noticed. Hands clutching a paintbrush, not upright but downward, dripping color onto the ground. She stood before a crumbling wall, cracks running jagged like veins, behind which a faint light seeped through. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't posing. She was simply there, exhausted yet unbroken, caught in the act of deciding whether to break free. The house around me was quiet now. Megan's laughter had faded, footsteps creaked upstairs and doors closed. My parents' voices mumbled faintly down the hall, softer with the weight of sleep. The silence felt like a shield, giving me room to keep going. I dipped my brush into crimson and added streaks slashing across the canvas, bold, unapologetic. They didn't represent blood, they represented defiance. The kind that demanded to be seen, even if ignored for years. At some point, hours slipped by unnoticed. My back ached, my fingers cramped, but I couldn't stop. I added shadows under the woman's eyes, not to make her weak, but to show she had endured. I painted cracks in her hands, callous from holding on too long. And in her eyes, two small glimmers of white, stubborn sparks that refused to go out. A knock startled me. I froze, brush hovering midair. Nora. It was Mom's voice, muffled through the door. "It's late, honey. Don't stay up too long." My chest tightened. I stared at the canvas, at the figure staring back at me. For once, I didn't scramble to hide, to downplay, to apologize. "I'm fine," I said, steadying my voice. "Just finishing something." She lingered for a moment. "All right. Don't wear yourself out." Her footsteps faded. I let out a long breath, shoulders sagging. Then I dipped my brush again and kept going. By dawn, the painting was nearly complete. My room reeked of paint. My hands stained in a dozen colors. My eyes burned, but I couldn't look away from the canvas. She was there. The woman. Me but not me. Stronger, more defiant, carrying every ounce of pain and still standing. Behind her, the crumbling wall revealed a sliver of sky, faint gold, a sunrise breaking through. I stepped back, heart pounding. For the first time I felt seen. Not by my family, Not by the world, but by myself. The sun broke through my curtains, washing the painting in soft light. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, staring at it as if it might dissolve if I looked away. My body screamed for rest, but my mind was alive, sharper than it had been in months. A thought came, quiet but steady. This is what I'll leave them. Not just a painting, but a truth they could never ignore. A final creation that would hang in that studio long after I was gone. A reminder carved in color and canvas. Later that morning, Megan knocked once and walked in without waiting. She froze when her eyes landed on the easel. "What is this?" she asked, voice caught between curiosity and something sharper. "My last piece," I said simply, standing. She stepped closer, her brows pulling together. For once, she didn't have a ready dismissal. She stared at the woman on the canvas, at the cracked wall, the bleeding colors, the sparks in the eyes. Her mouth opened then closed. "It's intense." "It's me," I replied, not flinching. "Every part you never saw." She shifted uncomfortably, glancing away. "Mom won't like it. It's too dark for the kids." I almost laughed. "It's not for them. It's for me." Her silence stretched. Then she turned and left without another word. When the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear this time. It was release. I walked back to the canvas, running my fingers along the edge, smearing faint streaks of dried paint onto my skin. It didn't matter what Megan thought, or even what my parents would say. This was mine. My last creation. My voice when they had refused to hear me. And it would stay, long after I was gone. The silence after Megan left hung heavy in my room, pressing against the walls as if the painting itself had spoken louder than I ever could. I traced the dried streaks of color on my hands, my chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The figure on the canvas stared back at me, tired, bruised, but unbroken. For the first time, I felt she and I were the same. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I drifted in and out, waking every time the house shifted, a floorboard creaking, the hum of the heater, the faint murmur of my parents' voices down the hall. But instead of restlessness, there was a strange calm sitting inside me, like the quiet before a storm you know you can't avoid. By morning, the calm had hardened into resolve. The smell of breakfast wafted through the hallway when I stepped out, bacon sizzling, coffee brewing, toast crisping in the oven. A typical Saturday morning, except I carried a truth that would shatter the routine. My footsteps felt heavier as I made my way to the kitchen, every creak of the wood floor echoing like a warning. Mom was at the stove, humming softly, her robe pulled tight around her. Dad sat at the table, glasses perched on his nose as he read the newspaper, a mug of coffee steaming in front of him. Megan was already there with her kids, their cartoons playing loudly on her phone to keep them distracted. It looked so normal, so ordinary, like a picture out of someone else's life. "Morning," Mom said brightly when she saw me, as if last night hadn't happened. I forced a smile, sliding into a chair at the far end of the table. "Morning." The first 10 minutes passed in a blur of clinking forks and casual chatter. Megan talked about how the twins needed more storage for their toys. Dad mentioned the roof needing repairs before winter. Mom reminded everyone about a family friend's birthday party next weekend. I nodded occasionally, but my mind wasn't in the room. It was hovering, waiting for the inevitable. And then it came. "So," Megan said, sipping her coffee, her tone almost playful, "when do you think we can start moving their things into the studio?" I was thinking maybe next week. The sooner the better, right? The fork slipped in my hand, clattering against the plate. Everyone looked up. "Is that what you've decided?" I asked quietly, my voice sharper than I intended. Mom glanced between us, her expression tightening. "Nora, we just think it makes sense. The kids are growing, they need more space, and you don't use it the way you used to." I cut her off. "Don't use it? I painted until dawn last night." The room went still. Dad lowered his paper slowly, his eyes narrowing behind the lenses. "I'm not saying it isn't important to you," Mom continued, her voice softer now, like she was speaking to a child throwing a tantrum. "But we have to think about everyone's needs. You can paint in your room, can't you? You don't need a whole studio for that." Something inside me snapped. It's not just a room with 4 walls, Mom. That studio is the only place in this house where I've ever felt like I mattered. The words came out louder than I expected, trembling with years of silence breaking open. Megan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her kids before muttering. This doesn't have to be such a big deal. It's just space. The kids will outgrow it eventually. Just space, I repeated, my voice thick. I looked at each of them, one by one. You've taken everything else. My time, my place in this family, my worth. And now you want the one corner of this house that kept me breathing. The twins, sensing tension, climbed off their chairs and wandered into the living room. Megan followed them with her eyes but didn't get up. Dad folded the newspaper carefully, placing it down with deliberate precision, and finally spoke. Nora, he said, his tone low but firm, you're overreacting. We're not taking anything from you. You're still part of this family. But Megan's kids. I know, I snapped. Megan's kids always come first. Always. The silence that followed was different this time. He didn't argue, didn't deny it. That was answer enough. My chest ached. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to steady before the next words left my lips. You don't need to worry about it. You can have the studio. All of it. Mom blinked. What are you saying? I held her gaze. I won't be here much longer anyway. The weight of my words crashed into the room. Forks froze midair, eyes widened, and even the background noise of cartoons from the living room seemed to dull. Megan frowned. What do you mean you won't be here? I swallowed, my throat tight but my voice unwavering. I'm leaving. I've been planning it for months. I already have my ticket. Mom's hand went to her chest. Nora. Dad leaned forward, his elbows pressing against the table. Leaving where? Out of the country, I said. The words tasted like both freedom and grief. I can't stay here anymore. Not like this. For the first time in years, they were all looking at me. Not past me, not through me, but directly at me. The attention burned, and yet it was the validation I had been starved of for so long. Mom's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? I asked softer now. You never saw me. Not really. You saw Megan. You saw her kids. You saw everything else. But me. I shook my head. I was just here. Filling space. Megan opened her mouth, but for once, she didn't have words. The conversation stretched on. A fragile thing that could shatter with one wrong move. Questions spilled. Where I was going. How long I'd been planning. What I would do there. I answered some, left others hanging. The details weren't what mattered. What mattered was the shift in the air. The realization that I wasn't asking for their approval. I was telling them. I was done waiting to be noticed. Done begging for scraps of attention in a house that never made room for me. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling as it brushed mine. Nora, please. Don't go like this. We can work something out. I pulled my hand back gently. You'll be fine. You'll have the studio, the space, everything you wanted. And I'll finally have what I need. And what's that? Dad asked, his tone clipped. I looked at him steadily. A life that's mine. The words lingered in the air, heavier than anything I'd ever said to them. The rest of breakfast dissolved into silence. Megan busied herself with the twins, Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin, and Dad stared at his untouched coffee. I sat there, breathing in the weight of my own truth, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. Something had broken. But for the first time it wasn't me. It was the hold they had over me. And in that fracture, I found freedom. The light in the studio was dim that morning, softer than usual. As though the world outside already knew this place was no longer truly mine. I ran my hand across the long wooden table, its surface speckled with years of paint splatters. Some stains had faded, but others remained stubborn, as if they too refused to be erased. This table had carried the weight of every canvas, every brushstroke, every sleepless night I had poured into my art. Yet now, standing there, I felt like a visitor in a space I had built with my own hands. I had not expected the studio to feel foreign. It had always been my safe place, the one corner of the world where I was not judged, where I could breathe without fear of being overlooked or ignored. But something had shifted. Ownership was not just about having a set of keys or a deed tucked away in a folder. It was about belonging. And that sense of belonging had been stolen from me long before anyone tried to claim the space. "Looks smaller than I remember," I whispered to myself. The words echoed against the walls, and I quickly regretted speaking them aloud. The truth was, the studio hadn't changed at all. I had. The first reminder came in the form of footsteps, loud, entitled, and unapologetic. My sister's heels clicked against the floor as though she owned every tile. She paused near the window, gazing at the shelf of brushes and jars. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, her tone sharp but casual, the kind that suggested she wanted me to know she had the upper hand. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I busied myself with rearranging a stack of old sketchbooks. The leather covers were worn, the corners curled, but they felt solid in my hands, like proof that I had existed here long before her intrusion. "You could have done something useful with this space," she continued, stepping further inside. "A cafe, a shop, something that actually brings in money. Instead, it's just mess." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because she could not see what I saw. Every jar, every brush, every scrap of paper carried a memory. The mess she spoke of was my life's work. I finally turned to face her. "It's not mess. It's mine." She raised her brows, smirking like I'd just confessed a secret she already knew how to weaponize. Not for much longer. That night, long after she left, I sat alone in the studio, the silence pressing against me. I thought of all the paintings that had started in this room. My mother's portrait, the landscapes I painted when I still believed in wide horizons, even the small sketches no one else had ever seen. Each one was a thread in the fabric of my story. I couldn't stop the memories from flooding in, like the time the ceiling leaked during a storm, and I stayed up all night holding a bucket in one hand and my brush in the other, determined not to let water ruin what I had begun. Or the afternoons when children from the neighborhood would peek through the cracked window, their faces lighting up as they watched me mix colors. I'd let them in sometimes, giving them scraps of paper and broken crayons, watching their joy fill the air. The studio had been more than four walls. It had been a sanctuary, a witness to both my struggles and my triumphs. Losing it would feel like losing a part of myself. But life rarely waits for sentiment. A week later, men arrived with papers in hand. They wore polite smiles, the kind that softened the cruelty of what they carried. "Just procedure," one of them said, sliding a document across my table. The words blurred before my eyes. Legal phrases written in sharp black ink, stripping me of the very place where I had found myself. I signed nothing. Not that day. Not the day after. Instead, I sat in the middle of the floor, my canvases piled around me like soldiers standing guard. If they wanted to take the studio, they would have to take me too. One evening, when the sun dipped low and painted the walls in orange light, I decided to create something. Not for them, not for the world, but for me. I pulled out a blank canvas, larger than any I had worked on in years. My hands trembled as I mixed the colors, the air thick with turpentine and defiance. Brush to canvas, I poured everything into that piece. The years of being overlooked, the ache of being told I wasn't enough, the fury of having what was mine threatened. It wasn't neat or graceful. It was raw, chaotic, alive. Streaks of red cut through shades of blue, shadows of black curled around bursts of yellow. Every stroke screamed, "This is mine. You cannot take this from me." By the time I finished, my arms ached, and my clothes were streaked with paint. But when I stepped back, I felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Of course, the studio still wasn't safe. The threats didn't vanish because I created something beautiful. Papers still arrived. Voices still argued over who had the right to claim what I had built. But inside me, something shifted. I realized they could never truly own what mattered. They could take the walls, the floor, even the ceiling above me. But not the spirit that had lived here. One morning, a young girl from the neighborhood knocked on the door. She held one of my old sketches, folded and worn, her eyes wide with excitement. "I kept it," she said proudly. "I show it to everyone. They all say it's beautiful." I knelt down, tears pricking my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, taking her small hands in mine. In that moment, I understood. My work had already left this room. It lived in people, in memories, in hearts I had touched. The studio was never just mine, and yet it would never truly belong to anyone else either. The day they finally locked the door behind me, I didn't fight. I stood there quietly, one hand resting against the cool wood, and whispered a promise to myself. This place may be gone, but what it gave me will never die. As I walked away, the sound of my footsteps echoed not with loss, but with freedom. They could never truly own the studio, and they could never truly own me.